A very good afternoon to you. Where this is Mervyn Williams. First, there are a number of elections there. There's an election for the regional, and there for geographic candidates for the for the parliament and top-up candidates for the parliament. Are heating up, and today we want to discuss the question of challenges facing coalition possibilities and the opportunities which those present. For some background information, it is important for us to know that in 1964, before Guyana became an independent country, there was a very important election. And in that election, the People's Progressive Party secured 24 seats, the People's National Congress 22, and the United Force 7. Back then, it was possible to coalesce following the announcement of results, and the People's National Congress, United Force coalition, and government. The People's National Congress won those elections. Secured 30 seats, the People's Progressive Party 19. I believe we have some stats that we can share with you. And United Force, led by Peter Stanislaus de Gar, 4 seats. Of course, the leader of the PNC at the time was Mr. Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, and the People's Progressive Party was led by Dr. Cherry Chagan. Fast forward to 1992, which we're looking at the moment. Many people may not be familiar with the fact that in 1992, following the results of those elections being made public, the People's Progressive Party formed the government. However, if we could go back to the previous slide, you'll see the distribution of seats, which tell you that the People's Progressive Party was in fact a minority government in 1992. We will discuss how they survived, and as we go forward, well, of course, in the run-up to these elections in 1992, there were a lot of attempts at coalition. I believe there was a Patriotic Coalition for Democracy, there was GARD, the Guyana Action Reform Movement, I believe it was, and all of that. Eventually, they became part of the People's Progressive Party, forming its arm, which the PPP would like to say is a coalition. Of course, later on, the Reform Group joined with the People's National Congress. And then we fast forward to 2011, when we had another case of a minority government, where the Alliance for Change, with their 7 seats, and the APNU with their 26, had a 1-seat majority over the People's Progressive Party. That resulted in a collapse of the PPP government with a vote of confidence that was moved against the People's Progressive Party government. And instead of contesting that motion in Parliament, Donald Rambutar opted to call early elections. Following those elections, in the run-up to those elections, the there was a grand coalition with the APNU. And here it is. We will discuss the genesis of the APNU, I'm sure, is going forward. And that coalition took the APNU AFC into government. And that's pretty much up to date information for those persons who may not have been aware with the historic position on these matters. I'd like to introduce my guest, Dr. David Hinds, who is no stranger to the Guyanese public and a man with a wealth of knowledge and experience in the political arena, and a man who can speak with authority on the subject of coalition in Guyana. Dr. Hinds, welcome to Nation Watch.
Thank you very much, Mervyn, and it's a pleasure to be here again with you. It's been a couple of months, but
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Your overview, in your estimation, has coalition politics benefited Guyana in a way that you believe it could have?
Yes, to some extent, it has benefited. Guyana is a country of coalitions. It has to be. We are a plural society in terms of the different ethnicities. We have, they say, 6 ethnicities, and it points to the plurality of our situation. We're also socially plural in the sense that we have had a kind of established what we call in these parts middle class. These are persons who belong to that strata in the society in between the old colonials and the vast working peoples at the bottom. So we are socially plural, we are ethnically plural. And the plurality brings with it individual representation. So each ethnic group tends to look to its own for representation. And also we developed in the Caribbean these so-called middle class parties that are middle class in origin, middle class in outlook and worldview. Of course, we have middle class people who led working class parties. So really we are always, and it's not just in Guyana, but in the Caribbean, but it's more pronounced in places like Guyana and Suriname and Trinidad and Tobago, because on top of the social stratification, we have the ethnic stratification in society. And so if you go back to the early independence parties, and I'll confine to Guyana, our early independence mass party, the People's Progressive Party, was a coalition. It was a coalition of the PAC, led by the Dragons. Mr. Burnham came in and he brought the urban middle class. You had the kind of old landed people in there. So it was really a coalition of forces, both in terms of ideology. I forgot to mention ideological differences and ideological plurality. So the PPP was, early PPP was really a coalition, and it was no accident that when the party split, one faction, which we called the Burnhamite faction, then we had another faction called the Jaganite faction, and then we had another faction in the middle, which was ideological left wing, which led to another split in 1956, when Martin Carter, Sidney King, Rory Westmus left. That's a second split. And then out of that came another set of coalition. The Jaganite PPP coalesced with the Indian business class, led by the C.R. Jacobs and the Bihari. They came in and became ministers in the PPP government. And the PNC, which came out of the Burnhamite Foundation, was really a coalition of 3 forces. The Burnham-led urban working class, and to some extent, the dark-skinned urban middle class. Then you had Sir John Carter with the LCP, the kind of what we call the red-skin middle class. And then Sidney King came and brought with him the rural working class. And it was those 3 forces that were the genesis of the PNC. And we come forward to the United Force was really a coming together of the Portuguese
And the indigenous.
and the indigenous. And we come to the WPA, ASCRA, the Black Nationalist Organization, IPRA, Indian People Revolutionary Associates of Moses Bagwan,
Yeah.
Indian. And then you had Ratoon. This is Clive Thomas and Josh Ramsamy and so on at UG. And in the early stages, you had Brindley Ben Working People's Vanguard Party. It's those four that came together and formed the Working People's Alliance. We fast forward to the AFC, which is the newest kid on the block in terms of age. And the AFC was really a combination of dissident PNC, Trotman, dissident PPP, Ramsden, dissident WPA, Shield Holder.
Yeah.
So if you look at our history, naturally our politics is really coalition politics. And so in that scenario, one has to say that we have come this far largely because we have had coalitions. They may not have been as effective as one, but they held our country together. Without the coalition of forces, as we have seen with this new PPP, and even this new PPP is really a combination of forces. It's the old PPP, the ideologues, and new PPP represented by the Jack Dews and Irfan Ali, who are not grounded ideologically, but who have a worldview that, look, I mean, anything goes. And then when you add to that the new middle classes that are created, these are money people, you give them contracts, they become big entrepreneurs. And so even that is a combination. But we have seen where one party government has led us, at least under the coalition of 2011 to 2020, because we have to come 2008, in effect, the coalition won those elections.
Yeah.
Although, when you look at what has happened from 2020 to 2025, what we see is what one party government does to our country. It has left our country really in shambles. And so therefore, yes, coalition has been a natural outgrowth of our politics.
When we speak in terms of um, recent history, building of coalitions, there are two gentlemen whose names are mentioned, but who have not really been given, for want of a better word, the recognition for the work that they've done. I remember Desmond Hoyt, former president, former leader of the opposition, who appeared at one stage not to be favorably considering this business of shared governance, coalition politics, call it what you may. They may not be the same thing, but in a general sense, But he came here to Congress Place at one of those congresses, and he said that he believed that shared governance, called by any other name, is something whose time has come.
2002.
Right.
2000. He died in that same year.
Yes.
Right.
The reform component linked with the People's National Congress, that seemed to be, in terms of recent history, a very large first step. And then, having contested under that brand, the leader of the PNC who succeeded Mr. Hoyt, Mr. Corbyn, Robert Herman Orlando Corbyn, he set about a task of creating what he called big umbrella politics.
Yes.
And the work he did, in my estimation, is largely responsible for what we now celebrate as a partnership for national unity. And not only did he work to build that, but he stepped aside from contesting as presidential candidate, yielding to a new dimension, a new dynamic within the PNC, and continue to work as leader of the party, shaping and molding and strengthening a partnership for national unity, which Mr. David Granger worked with and developed even further. But I believe that kudos to Mr. Corbyn for the kind of work he did, the fundamental work that he did to get this APNU off the ground. How important, in your view, was the creation of a partnership for national unity in the context of national politics and coalition?
Fundamental, monumental. And as you say, when you're in the presence of history, you don't realize the weight of what you're doing. What Robert Corbyn did was to create almost a miracle. He had tried in the 2006 election.
Yes.
PNC won Guyana.
One Guyana, yes.
Right? Didn't get, it wasn't what he was looking for.
Yeah.
What Mr. Corbyn was able to do with Rupert Rupnerine and Clive Thomas was to bring two political arch enemies together.
Yeah.
He didn't just create a partnership of unity.
Yeah.
It was the unlikeliest of marriages. Because you know, and those of us of a certain age know, that the WPA and the PNC really fought it out in the 1970s and the 1980s.
Yes.
And when
And in the literal sense too.
in the literal sense. Literal sense. And so when Mr. Corbyn wanted to move in that direction, he went to his arch enemies. And they sat down and came up with a partnership for national unity. The country has not yet given Corbyn, Thomas, and Rupnerine the recognition for what they did in our politics. What it showed that we as Guyanese, regardless of our political differences, that we could come together in the interest of our country. I can tell you as a WPA person who was partly involved in those talks. I mean, what drove us was when we looked at what the PPP was doing to this country. What we looked at the way it was destroying the foundations of this country. We said, look, our problems with the PNC fade in terms of what was in front of us. And so we sat down and we decided to come up with a partnership for national unity. We gave this country a second chance to live. Without the partnership for national unity, we and the PPP had continued in office at the rate at which they were going. And based on what we have seen from 10 to 20, this country would have been a different country. And so I want to join you to go on record in lauding Mr. Corbyn and his co-workers in the WPA, Dr. Thomas and Dr. Rupnerine, for creating a partnership for national unity. It is a genesis of what we can now call the modern coalition movement. Of course, from a really deep ideological perspective, yes. Mr. Hoy did not originally believe in shared governance. He called it protean, and so on. But we worked on it. Worked on him. There was a cadre of PNC people, the Nortons, St. Alexander. I think you were part of that.
And so was
James
McAllister, Debbie Backer,
and so on. On our side, you had the Senta Kumo Gunsi, and we were out there in the peoples pushing for shared government. And eventually, Mr. Hoy came to Congress in 2002 and said, Paul Shane, by whatever name you call it, its time has come.
Yeah.
And I think that really freed the PNC. So when he passed away, unfortunately, in December of 2002, Corbyn had a mandate to create what eventually became known as the APN.
Dr. Hinds, Robert Corbyn is so far the only leader of the People's National Congress who has not made it to the presidency.
Yeah.
But his work is equivalent to that of a president, in my view.
Yeah.
Why do I say that? One, the PNCR had ruptured. Hamilton Green had left. He had formed his own political party, and he had contested against the PNC in the local government election and had won the city of Georgetown. It was not a bright and shining day for the PNC. But Robert Corbyn when he became leader, reintegrated Hamilton Green into the People's National Congress as a political institution of worth, of value. And we can still see the work of those persons even today who are active within the party structure and who have also been a part of the creation and maintenance and nurturing of the a partnership for national unity. I believe that history has to be kind to Mr. Corbyn with respect to the work that he has done for coalition politics in this country.
It must be, and I can tell you, I say it again, the respect that our party has for Robert Corbyn is unparalleled when it comes to other leaders of the PNC. I'm not saying the other leaders of the PNC do not deserve respect, but having worked with Robert Corbyn, he has earned our respect. And you know, that is something that is not always talked about, and that is why I'm so glad that you raise it. And I will not be carrying tales out to school if I were to say to you that for us in the Working People's Alliance, had Robert Corbyn become president of Guyana, I think coalition politics, I think the APNU would have been further than we are now. I'm not criticizing, this is not a criticism of those who took the mantle when Mr. Corbyn bowed out in a magnanimous way. He said, look, I have done what I set out to do, I've turned it over. Had he not turned it over and had he become president, I think our history will be having a different conversation here today.
Let's talk a little bit about the Working People's Alliance.
Mhm.
You mentioned arch enemies,
Yes.
arch rivals
The arch
of
rivals,
arch
yes,
rivals
yes,
of the
yes.
People's National Congress, and for good reason too.
Yeah.
Um, when the dust had settled on the 1992 elections, as I mentioned in my opening presentation, the People's Progressive Party was a minority government. Um, the difference was made by the Working People's Alliance. The Working People's Alliance still had not um, come around to embracing the PNC in the manner that it does now.
Yeah.
And therefore, it supported the People's Progressive Party in government in 1992. And I believe that any reasonable political party may have done the same thing, having regard for the expectations
Mhm.
that it would have had of Dr. Jagan and the People's Progressive Party at that time. Dynamic as politics is, um, walk us through the transitions. First, to support the People's Progressive Party as a not a coalition partner, but a strategic ally, and coalescing eventually with the People's National Congress following the engagements with Mr. Corbyn.
Yeah. No, it's quite an interesting question. By the time we got to the 1992 election, the PPP and WP had fallen out. We've fallen out over the question of the presidential candidacy. We felt that neither Dr. Jagan nor Mr. Hoy, sorry, not Dr. Jagan should not be the consensus candidate because he belonged to the old politics. So that we did not put forward the UC Guyana. We felt that the PPP should not have put forward Dr. Jagan. We were prepared to support a neutral candidate. And the name of Bishop George was floated, the name of Ashton Chase. And we were prepared to support them as neutral candidates. So we fell out with the PPP over that. And so we ran separately at the 1992 election. WPA got one seat. But as you mentioned, in Region 8, we held the balance. And we could have given that seat to the PNC or to the PPP. We gave it to the PPP. And it was that seat that the PPP used to get a majority. The PPP became a majority party in 1992 because the WPA gave them a seat that we could have given to the PNC. We gave the PPP that seat. And we did it not because we were friends, because by that time we were no longer friends, all right, as we were before the election. And so, but we did it, as you said, because the politics had taken us there. We had almost 3 decades of PNC rule. We had fought against what we saw overreach of the PNC during that period, and we felt it was the logical thing to do, to give them the seat. And we asked for nothing, and they gave us nothing. And we were quite fine because we felt we were doing it for the country. So for the younger people, and I know when this thing, I think Vincent Alexander raised it on a program a couple of weeks ago, nobody knew. Not even the political sophisticates knew that little piece of history,
Yeah.
that it was the WPA that gave the PPP a seat to make them a majority government in 1992. And I think that is important because sometimes people look at the present, they see us now in partnership with the PNC. And they say, oh, you all are anti-PPP, you all don't like Indian people, and all of that kind of stuff. We look at politics in what is called a concrete way. Concretely, in 1992, we felt that we had to make the decision that we made. And from around 2006, in a concrete way, we felt that the PPP had become dangerous for this country as a party. And we had to then reach to our arch rivals and to say, look, in the interest of stopping this PPP juggernaut, in the interest of making our country survive, we have to sit down with you and work with you, you know? And so therefore, a study of the WPA, an impassioned study, an impartial study, will put us in good light. We said, these are people who have never really put themselves first. They've always put the country first. And they've made decisions that surely at that time PNC people were angry with us, understandably so. And today PPP people are angry with us because we joined with the PNC to help to win in 2015. And we are confident that we can help to win in 2025. As you would have noticed, Mervyn, when everybody was scrambling and negotiating and doing all kinds of things from last year, the WPA said formally, we are going to a coalition with the PNC / APN. We are clear about that. We are not going and bargaining and doing all this stuff because we thought the logic of our politics had brought us there. And when Comrade Norton was being pilloried, was being attacked, we took a principled position in relation to Comrade Norton, not Comrade Norton the person, but what Comrade Norton represents in terms of the social dynamics of our society. And we felt that there was a collision in terms of the social dynamics of our society. And we came down on the side of what Norton represents. And again, I said, this has nothing to do with Norton as the individual and so on. I mean, people can make the criticisms, that's their right. But we are saying in terms of the principles in the society, because we are saying, look, what has happened in the Guyana and the Caribbean is that the post-colonial governments, as represented first by Burnham and later by Hoyt and others, but under Burnham, they create a new class, a new middle class. So Guyana has two middle classes. The old middle class, based on status, the lawyers, the doctors, and so on, the so-called brown skin, red skin, and so on and so forth. But then we have the new middle class of people like you and Aubrey Norton and myself, who through education were able to rise from the so-called ghettos, from the so-called poor section of the society, and make something of ourselves through education, through free education. Had it not been for free education, many of us would not have made it to university. And so therefore, I think we have come to this juncture in history where we are now transitioning to a petrol state. And the question is who controls and distributes the resources? How these resources are distributed. And so we see the collision, if you will, of an old middle class with a new middle class. You've seen it in the PPP too. the old political class, the old Marxists of the dragon. And then you have these new people that Jack and them have brought in, right? The Mohammeds and all these kind of people. And you've seen the collision among Indians too. And I think we have to work that through, right? Both segments of the middle class, the old middle class and the new middle class, are important. But WPA was very clear that we were not going to go for a politics of entitlement and say, look, the old middle class is entitled to lead. We are saying both classes are entitled to lead, and both classes, through their representatives, must sit down and come up with a coalition. And so we were very, very clear. We didn't get into the anti-Norton kind of thing that he's not electable, because we think that was socially laden.
Oh, yes.
It was racially laden, and we were not going to get into that. And secondly, the notion of coalition, that one has to be very clear. If you believe in coalition, then you follow where that takes you, you know? And if you follow where the coalition takes you, it can't be party force.
It has to be country.
It has to be country force.
Dr. Hinds, there are two diametrically opposed manners in handling coalition by the two political parties. Let's look at the People's Progressive Party. They have consumed the PCD. They've consumed GUARD. They've consumed the TUF. They've consumed the United Republican Party with, what's the gentleman's name? Ramsamy. They have consumed the party that was formed by this gentleman who, Nanda Kishore Gopal.
Right, GLP.
They have now consumed Schuman's party.
And they consumed the TUF.
Yes, they did. And now they've gone TNM, I think it is.
Yes.
They've gone with that. The People's National Congress, on the other hand, has set about bringing political parties together and it's a difficult task, because you come with different perspectives, different ideologies, different ways of doing things. You come with different constituencies, and it's more difficult to manage, and therefore the dynamics have got to be handled in a very, very, very skillful way. But share with us your perspective on which of the two approaches may have done better for Guyana, and which of the two approaches you embrace, and why?
Yeah. The PPP's approach is grounded in the old communist view of the world. All right? A view of domination, what they call democratic centralism. Really, it's more centralism
than democratic, yeah.
Right?
Democratic only comes when it's time to say I and nay.
Right. So it's the politics of domination. If you study communist ideology, it's grounded in that politics of domination. Burnham was more of a Fabian socialist. And by Fabian socialist, I mean a socialism that arose out of the social democracy of Western Europe and so forth. He may have become a third world socialist later on, as we all became, right? Because by third world socialism, what I meant is a socialism that's grounded in anti-colonialism. European socialism wasn't grounded in anti-colonialism.
No, not at all.
So we borrowed the socialist philosophy from them, but we added to it an anti-colonial, anti-imperialist notion to it. And so what you had, therefore, were two parties that were grounded in two approaches of the left. One approach grounded in domination, one approach grounded in a more pragmatic coalition kind of politics. You know, the early PNC should have included the GAR. The GAR and the UF were supposed to be in the early PNC, but they opted out after and the talks broke down. So they were not in the thing. But the Burnhamite faction engaged the UF first before it engaged John Carter, and later on when Guyana left, and so forth. No, so the notion of a Fabian Western Caribbean socialism is more a coalition grounded approach, as opposed to the communist approach, which is that you consume everybody under this one thing and you control them. And so, therefore, that's what you see. Now, clearly, I am biased towards the kind of third world approach to coalition. And I think that that has done better than the control of the PPP.
Could it be classified as a revolution of sorts?
Yes, it is. It is in many regards a revolution. Because look, you see, our society comes out of a cooperative ethos. You see, so it's easy. I mean, the Africans, Nkrumah and others would say, but there was socialism in Africa before European socialism.
And here in Guyana as well.
Right, and so they developed the notion of what they call African socialism, and here people loosely talk about cooperative socialism, and so on and so forth. The fact of the matter is our society, in the way it developed, is more oriented towards a more sharing, a jointness, a togetherness. We survived and became Guyana through that sharing and togetherness. And Walter Rodney's book, The History of the Guyanese Working People, 1881 to 1905, really is a study, African workers and Indian workers. The native people were not involved in that movement yet, but all Indian workers and African workers together were able to fight back against colonialism. And so we have had instances in what Guyana call meeting and parting. There are times when, as a society, we meet and we survive. And there are times when we part, right? But we have always found ways to meet again. And really, so the approach of the PNC has always been an approach of inclusion, given its ideological perspective. Now, one of the things that I be back against is the PPP's notion that the PNC discriminated against East Indians. Now, I'm not doubting that there are individual East Indians who would have been discriminated against, but East Indians as a group were never discriminated as a group by the PNC. All those Indian holidays, they weren't given by Jagan 1957, 64. Those Indian holidays all were given under the PPP, the PNC. Let me repeat that. Those Indian holidays, those Amerindian holidays, those naming of places after East Indians and native people were done under the PNC. And I'm saying that as a person who was opposed to the PNC, who cut my teeth in on anti-PNC politics. But facts are facts, all right? And so therefore, when we talk about the state being diverse, about the state being inclusionary, the state under the PNC was much more inclusionary than the state under the PPP. I can point to holidays, I can point to the names of places, and I can point to the way in which the PNC deliberately, I heard stories from old YSM people that they couldn't go to certain Congress, they couldn't go become Burnham, look at the list when they put before it, and he said, you gotta get Indian people, you gotta get Amerindian people there, so some black people, they can't go, because, so for the PNC, the inclusionary politics was much more instinctive than in the PPP. You can see the PPP forcing sometime. You can come over, but when you come over, you gotta be like we. You got denounce where you come from. I thought, and I still think, that the PNC's approach was much more intentional, much more democratic, and much more instinctive.
You mentioned the spirit of cooperativism,
Yeah,
and the inspiration that gave to what you consider the third world approach to this. A little known fact in our own country is that there is a striking similarity between the cultures of the Africans and the culture of the indigenous peoples. The spirit of cooperativism. It is, in my view, a fusing of the two cultures that inspired the naming of our country as a cooperative republic
Yeah.
and inspired the building up of the village movement and the establishment. Of course, the village movement comes from Africa, and Africans came and met it here in the
Yes.
indigenous
Yeah.
communities. And the fusing of those practices, cultures, and customs allowed us as a nation to promote this whole cooperative spirit, which the People's Progressive Party, when it came to power, uh, almost totally destroyed.
Yes. Yes.
And I think people need to understand that it is those who write the history that creates impressions in our minds. Nobody has really written the story of the indigenous peoples as far as the custom, practice, tradition of cooperative spirit is concerned. In fact, as we speak, the PPP is destroying the last element. I grew up knowing something called kayap, where when my mother wanted to cut her farm, she would signal to people and they will come. She will cook, they will bring drink, and they will work, and then they will feast. And then the next weekend, everybody had a job because where I come from is where Burnham had established a livestock development company, um, ranch in Arakaka, a huge
Mhm, mhm.
ranch. So everybody worked, but on weekends. And that will go on until everyone had their fields cut. The most recent example of its continued existence is what you call village cleaning day, village
Mhm,
work day
mhm.
in indigenous villages, where a day is designated for persons to come out and do their bit to improve the village, clean up, do whatever has to be done. Now the People's Progressive Party is putting money out there and saying, we're going to pay you to watch this engine room. We can pay you to watch that building. We can pay you to clean the village. Killing, as it were, this tradition that obviously the PPP knows absolutely nothing about. I just thought I needed to make that point.
And I fight just for 2 minutes.
Sure.
Look, if you study what we now call antiquity, ancient
Mhm.
history, African antiquity, see, these were civilizations that were in touch with the soil, in touch with nature,
Yeah.
because they're constantly having to negotiate with nature in
Mhm.
order to survive.
Yep.
All right. So when the Africans came here and they met indigenous people, there was a bonding that took place that I think some of us, and I blame myself as a scholar, I've not paid much attention to that relationship. In the United States, in Virginia, the early settlement in Virginia, they had what was called the Wind Tribe. This was white Indians, indigenous people, and Negroes, the Wind Tribe,
Mhm.
right? These, they intermarriage and they created these, what we call Douglarization and so on. And the white people were deathly afraid of the Wind Tribe. They said, you are bringing together, poor whites, the genes of poor whites, the genes of Native Indians, and the genes of
Of free
Negroes.
blacks, yeah.
Dangerous,
Mhm.
dangerous, the Wind Tribe. And they consigned them to what they call extinction. They said that tribe will become extinct because it's a bad combination. Here in our Caribbean, there was the same thing. And in St. Vincent, when the Africans and the Amerindians who intermarried and created what they call this dangerous concoction, they put them on boats, set them a sail in the Caribbean Sea. They ended up in Central America, in what is now Belize
Mhm.
and Honduras and Costa Rica. They call them the Garifuna people or
Garifuna.
Black Caribs.
I met them. I met some
All
of
right?
them. Yeah.
They're really Vincentians,
Mhm.
who the white colonials said, this dangerous mix of the blacks and the Americans, we don't want them here to put them on boats.
They managed to keep a lot of the culture anyway.
And that's it. So I'm making that point to say you are correct. All right. A lot of people, for example, believe that pepper pot is a black dish. All right.
A blackened dish.
Yeah, right. It's blackened, but it's really as you know, and our young people, you know, it's an Amerindian dish. But there was a creolization
Yes.
of it, and so Amerindians own it. Blacks have will claim it to some point, and so on and so forth. But I make that point to say that an aspect of our history and our culture that has not been properly written about, as you say, and analyzed, is that creolization of the native Indian and the African. Of course, we have terms such as Bofianda,
Mm.
Bokan people,
Mm.
and all those derogatory terms.
Mm.
But I think those things need to be put in perspective, all right? And so that our younger people can have a better appreciation and to say, look, this thing is not just about a conflict between East Indians and Africans. Our country becomes consumed by that, and we forget. And that's why I am very heartened by the fact that the fastest growing population in our country are indigenous people, and that indigenous people are now speaking out in many voices. You know, it's not just one Amerindian association, but several voices that is speaking out and asserting them and forcing the rest of us to listen to them and to recognize the role that they have played in the evolution of our country.
There's another interesting bit of information that is not um, popular out there. We keep saying that we have 6 ethnicities in Guyana. Um, I'm not altogether um, sure of that because, in my mind, I see the indigenous peoples as 9 separate ethnic groups.
There you go. There you
All
go. There
right.
you go.
And he who can bring about a coalition of those 9 ethnic groups can do this country a lot of good.
Yes.
But I want to take your attention to this concept of the joinder arrangement.
Yes.
Guyana's constitution and laws provide for coalitions prior to nomination day. You have to declare your list, you have to declare your symbol, and all of it. Well, in fact, yeah, from the presentation of the symbol to the continuation of the entire process, which includes nomination, you have got to have that coalition in place before. Of course, we discussed briefly 1964, where it happened post-election. That has since changed.
Yes.
Now, this notion of the joinder arrangement says that multiple political parties can enter into civil agreements that they will contest these elections individually, but at the end of the process, they will amalgamate their votes. And the sum total of the votes will determine the seat arrangement or the seat allocation with respect to those political parties. I don't want to get into how they share and if they share, but this joint list notion seems to be a backdoor way of contravening the constitutional provisions with respect to coalitions. What's your view of this?
I agree with your interpretation. Now, let me make it very clear. I am in favor of post-election coalition, right? I want to put that on the table. Having said that, the Constitution prohibits that. So if you're telling me now about a joinder where you can now create a post-election coalition, because that's what the
That's
joiner
what it
is.
is. Yeah.
I think it flies in the face of both the letter and the spirit of the Constitution as it is. All right? I think you put it in local language. It's a backdoor way of creating a post-election thing. And I think that you are violating the Constitution. But more than that, is that other parties who are not in joiners, you are violating their rights because they are not able to exercise the same right that you are exercising. They have to go based on the Constitution. That they got 30 seats and they got to stay with that 30 seats. And you
Who may not be entitled to a single
may
seat
not get a single seat.
and still enjoy
Can
one.
still enjoy, and you may be taking a seat from one of those larger parties because really what you are doing is you are taking the leftovers,
Yeah.
and the leftovers really supposed to go to the party with the largest number of leftovers. And say, for example, at this joinder not being, I'm sure that leftover would have gone to either the PPP
Yeah.
or the APNU AFC.
Yeah.
So in a sense, you are robbing the big parties, but more importantly, it's a violation, I think, of the spirit of the letter of the Constitution.
Going forward, Dr. Hinds, where do you see coalitions taking us politically?
I think that coalitions will take us to a place of security, a place of safety, and a place of confidence. More and more, I am mildly surprised, and I shouldn't be because it's something that people like myself have worked for. But I have never, Mervyn, in all my almost 50 years as a political activist, I have never seen an appetite and enthusiasm for coalition politics as I've seen in the opposition base. In many regards, it excites me, but in other regards, it's it says that people like myself are behind because we don't recognize the fruits of our labor. All right, I have not young people, big people too, but I'm paying attention to young people are stopping me on the streets. You know, I went to a young man to fix my brakes the other day, you know, and he's talking to me, Dr. Hinds, man, you don't know Nigel, man. Can you go talk to him, no man? We want this thing. And he's fixing my brakes. And of course, at the end, he said, man, I'm charging you for this. All I want you to do is go and talk to Nigel, right? And young people, I'm in Box, I live, and young people are stopping me and saying, man, how come win without this coalition thing? They're almost, some of them in tears, some of them, you know, the young people that do their hand like this, they are impatient. I think that the work that we have done in the last decade and a half, the example that APNU and APNU AFC has set, has now become part of the belly of our certainly on our side. I think it's there in the PP on the PPP side. They are not going to express that now because there's no incentive for them to express it now. So it's more expressed on the opposition side. And so therefore I'm excited by that because it means therefore that coalition is not just on the brains of leaders, it's in the belly of ordinary people. And I think that, you know, in another decade or so, our country at the mass level is going to become comfortable in working together. I went to a funeral, I think it was a year ago, young people, young chap died and thing, I went there. And there were about 4 young ladies. There couldn't be more than 20, 21. And so they're looking at me. So I was with somebody. Say, you're looking at that man, you know, that's all well being on know he. But I say he's an APNU man. And the other one said, Bjorn, no, he's WPA. And they're having this argument between WPA and APNU. And the one said, but WPA is part of the APN. All right, Bjorn, you win. You win. And these are kids. not more than 21. And I'm there dumbfounded. First of all, they know the difference between WPA and APNU, and they're having this conversation, right? So I am excited about where we go. I will say, Marvin, the experience that we have had over the last few months of trying to put our coalition together and the hiccups that have occurred may disappoint some of our people. But I think it's a learning experience. I see it as a learning experience. It can only put us in good state. I am very confident that the AFC is not happy going on its own. I think the AFC would prefer to be in the coalition. I think AFC supporters and some of their leaders are happy. I think we all want the PPP to be removed. But sometimes, all right, we have to work this thing through, right? And there are going to be ups and there are going to be downs. Am I disappointed that the AFC is not fully on board? I am disappointed. I am disappointed because I think all of us being there together gives our people a strength. Oh, yes, I was right. Yes, I am right. Look at everybody together. It gives them that confidence. Those who are not enthusiastic will become enthusiastic. Martin said, "This is my hand for the revolution." That night there'll be thousands of torches. Those who are happy, those who are sad will become happy for the revolution. Those who despair shall be happy for the revolution. Those who are sick will become alive for the revolution. All right? And I myself shall be so fiercely happy that I'll make my short a banner for the revolution. And I think, the APNU coalition that is going into this election, I think is 75, 80% of the way. If the AFC comes in, it gives us a full 100. I will take 80% rather than nothing. Would I want 100%? Yes. And I think we could still pull this off as a coalition. Because as I said, we have planted something in the minds, in the psyche of our people, especially our young people. They expect us to coalesce. They expect us to come together. And I think even when we fail them 20% of the way, I think we have to let them know. And I'm using this platform to say to our people, despair not, all right? Because we have tried our best. Don't curse Nigel, don't curse the AFC, don't curse the APNU, because there are some people who are saying that the APNU was inflexible and so on. Let us don't curse one another, all right? Let us see this as a learning process. Let us see that in a working through. Look, Nigel and Aubrey and myself, among others, we are friends. That I think is part of coalition building, is when the leaders know each other. They're friends. We are friends. We remain friends, and that I think is a positive thing. If Marvin, if tomorrow we can get all of us in a room, not just now the APNU and the AFC, broaden it, bring people like myself and others in the room, and let us give this thing one more try. Let us see where we can go. I would be a very happy man, and our base would be, I am sure we will get 10,000 more votes. The 10,000 of people who are sucking the teeth. That if we can pull this thing together, that we are going to win hands down. The PPP knows that when we are together, their days are numbered. They know that. And that's why they celebrate when the AFC and the APNU could not reach a coalition agreement. And when they see the WPA and the APNU, AFC together, they're trying to say, Norton, what are you doing with the racists? You see, they're trying to tear us apart because they know that when we are together, we are strong, because that is where the country is headed.
There's a school of thought that says that coalitions really don't last.
Yeah.
Is the building of trust for the extension of the life of any coalition.
All right, let me say two things. Coalitions are not meant to last, right? That's the first thing. They're coalitions of convenience, and coalitions come into being and go out of being. So that's the first thing.
Mhm.
Second, I have a problem with you going to coalition, and in the process of working together, you build trust.
Mhm.
I am telling you, Mervyn, as an a WPA person coming into WPA at age 15, I'm saying I not hate PNC people, but I didn't know PNC people. I always thought they were different. And I started to associate with PNC people in 2010 when we started building coalition, and in 50 years. I got personal friends now in the PNC. These people are normal people, and I'm sure they're saying the same thing. These are normal people. I remember people like Ernest Elliott. We are all from the East Coast,
Mhm.
and Ernest welcomed people like me. So, you're looking around at some of the others, and you say, bye. But people like Ernest,
He was my best friend in Parliament. We sat
tell
next
you,
to each other.
embrace and honest, and honest a big bite for me, as we would say.
Oh
And
yes.
think, but honest, embrace me, and think. And today, I've gotten to know PNC, and that I can trust PNC people as individuals. Now, institutionally, you may say, well, you don't trust the PNC as a party, but the party is made of individuals. And I have met and I've befriended people in the PNC who are the most trustworthy people in the world. There are people who are not trustworthy in any political party. And so I am saying we are coming together to build trust.
Mhm.
How will we build trust? I don't trust you and I don't know you. I ain't walking with you, I'm gonna trust you. How do I get to know you? All right? My distrust for you is based on stereotypes. All right? Now, when I get to know you and I begin to work with you, then I am building trust because you are knowing me. I am knowing you. We just left a meeting up there, an
Mhm.
APNU meeting, and I went to two PNC comrades to say hello. And both of them, David Bigata. We are comrades,
Mhm.
and we've come to trust each other. So this nonsense that we have to build trust. No, we have been together now for 15 years. Am I going to sit there as WPN said we weren't shafted? Oh, yes, we were shafted by the PNC leadership. But I am talking here not about the PNC leadership. I'm talking about the PNC people, all right, on the ground. They didn't shaft me. The leaders shaft us. But this is the thing. People inside of political parties are shaft one another, right? Much more people from different parties. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying not because I was shafted politically, that means that coalition don't work. We have to build trust. We work with Robert Corbyn in building the APN. It took us about 5 years, but in those 5 years, we developed a trust in Robert Corbyn. It's not easy for political leaders to trust one another, We go big, all right? But we developed that trust with Robert Corbyn. I have known Aubrey Norton since we were at UG in the 1980s. We remain friends and so forth. And I have developed a trustworthy relationship with him. It was there all the time, but since we've been active politically, I would not say I am distrustful of Aubrey Norton. Do I disagree with Aubrey on some things? I do, because ideologically, why generally we come from the same third worldist kind of politics. We have some slight disagreements, but Marvin, that thing is PPP's mantra.
Oh
When I
yes.
hear it coming from our people, I ginch. I ginch.
I wanted you to expand on it.
Yes.
Tagdio who said that for there to be shared governance, you have to trust each other. You don't trust the PNC. So this is why I raised the question of trust.
Yeah. It's a PPP propaganda,
Yeah.
and I hear it coming from some of the comrades on this side, and I don't like. I'm like, glad you asked me that. We build trust over a
Time.
period of time.
And
As I've said, I've developed political friendship. some personal friendships with people in the PNC, people in the AFC, because of working over time, and we develop that confidence with each other.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hinds. We're out of time. I want to really thank you for making the time to share with us here on Nation Watch. And I can tell from some of the comments that your presence and your contribution to the conversation is greatly appreciated by our viewers.
And I tell you, Mervyn, it gives me great pleasure to sit with an American brother and have a conversation. As I said, it's one of the areas of my scholarship and my politics that I've neglected because we get consumed so much with the Indian African thing. You know, that the dynamics of a representative of the First Peoples and a representative of peoples who were brought here against their will, sitting down and having a conversation. It takes an example for our nation. You know, that people of different ethnicities who share a worldview, similar, and can talk without screaming at each other.
And come from similar customs,
practices. Yeah, always my pleasure.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us and staying with us the course of the program. You know that you have a duty to self and country, and to particularly to the future generations to come, to your children, your grandchildren, and those yet unborn, to make sure that we remove the People's Progressive Party from government come September 1, 2025, because as we know, for Guyana to grow, the PPP must go. Until we meet again, God bless.